Hello once again, and welcome to another episode of Unstoppable Mindset. I am your host, Michael Hingson, and today we have a fascinating guest, I believe, anyway. His name is Ken Kunken. Am I pronouncing that right?
Yes, you are.
Oh, good. And Ken, in 1970, underwent a problem when he was playing football and doing a tackle on a kickoff. Namely, he broke his neck and became a quadriplegic basically from the shoulders down. I'm sort of familiar with the concept because my wife from birth was in a wheelchair. She was a paraplegic, paralyzed from the T3 vertebrae down, which was like right below the breast. So she was able to transfer and so on. So not quite the same, but a lot of the same issues, of course. And we're going to talk about that basically because when you're in a wheelchair, like a lot of other kinds of disabilities, society doesn't tend to do all they should to accommodate. And I can make that case very well. Most people are light dependent, and we have provided reasonable accommodations for them by providing light bulbs and light on demand wherever they go, wherever they are, whatever they do. While at the same time, for people who are blind, we don't get the same degree of access without pushing a lot harder. And people in wheelchairs, of course, have all sorts of physical issues as well, such as stairs and no ramps and other things like that. And I know that Ken's going to talk some about that from university days, and my wife Karen faced some of the same things. But anyway, we'll get to it all. Ken, I want to welcome you to Unstoppable Mindset. And I think your wife Anna is visiting with us also, right?
Right. Thank you, Michael.
So Anna, welcome as well.
Thank you.
So Ken, why don't we start, if we could, by you telling us sort of about the early Ken, growing up and all that, from being a child, and tell us a little bit about you.
Okay, well, if you're going back to my childhood,
Scary, huh?
Yeah, it sure is. It's quite a while ago. But I was born in 1950, and that happened to be in the midst of the polio epidemic. And unfortunately, my mother contracted polio and died when I was less than 1 month old. So I have an older brother, Steve, who's 2 years older than me. And my father, brother, and I ended up moving in with my grandparents for a few years before my father remarried when I was 4 years old.
A long shot, but what's your birth date?
Right. My birth date is July 15th, 1950.
Okay. I'm February 24th, 1950. So, okay, was just kind of hoping there was the possibility.
Right.
Anyway, go ahead.
So during my father's second marriage, that's when my sister Merrill was born. She's 10 years younger than I am. But unfortunately, that was not a happy marriage, and it ended in a divorce. And when I was 18, my father married for the third time. So, growing up in a household with a number of individuals seemingly coming and going was a little different than most people's households when they were growing up.
How was that for you?
Well, it was nice in the sense that I got involved with a lot of different family members in my extended family. I'm very close growing up with my grandparents, with aunts, uncles, cousins, as well as my sister and brother. And, I had the opportunity to interact with a lot of different people. It was difficult during my father's second marriage because it was not a happy marriage. And, it worked out in everybody's best interest when that ended in divorce. But I look back at my childhood and I just basically recall it as a very happy childhood.
Oh, good. Well, so no real major traumas, certainly differences, but no real harrowing kinds of things that just threw you into a complete topsy-turvy, at least as far as you're concerned.
Right.
Yeah. Well, then you decided to go to Cornell, as I recall. And I know Cornell has I think it's a master's program, but an advanced program in hospitality. So did they feed you well at Cornell?
Yes, They had a very good system and fed us very well. And they have a program in hotel management,
Right.
which I was not involved in, but there was a lot of good food at Cornell when we were there.
Well, that's always important. You got to have good food. At UC Irvine, we were okay food wise. I was on the food committee for the dorms actually, and the food was all right. But when they had steak night, that they always made a big deal about, the steak was usually pretty tough, and so we had sometimes that the food wasn't great. But they had a great soft serve ice cream machine, so a lot of people took advantage of that. But anyway, so when you were at Cornell, you played football.
Right. I was on their lightweight football team. It's for people that were smaller than the heavyweight team. When I was playing, you had to weigh 154 pounds or less 2 days before the game. So
Hmm.
most of the people had played on their high school teams, was too small to play on the varsity college team, but it was a varsity sport. Most of the people were very good athletes and very fast, and it was a very competitive sport.
So tell us about that and what happened.
Well, during my junior year, I was injured making a tackle on a kickoff in a game against Columbia University. And when I tackled the ball carrier, I broke my neck and damaged my spinal cord. And as a result, I'm a quadriplegic. I'm almost totally paralyzed from the shoulders down.
And so, um, what kind of effect? Well, clearly that was pretty bad news and so on. So, what kind of effect did that have on you, and how did that shape what you did going forward?
Oh, it totally changed my perspective on everything about myself. I mean, growing up, my life seemed to center around sports. In high school, I played on the varsity football team. I wrestled on the varsity wrestling team. I played on four different intramural softball teams. I worked during the summer as a lifeguard. Everything in my life revolved around athletics and being
Mhm.
physically active. Now, suddenly, I couldn't be physically active at all. In fact, I am totally sedentary, sitting in a wheelchair, and I need assistance with all my activities of daily living now.
So, what did you do when the injury happened and so on? So, how did you deal with all of that?
Well, it was a really difficult adjustment to make. I mean, suddenly I became dependent on everybody around me because there was not one thing I could do for myself. So it was very difficult knowing that now not only was I dependent on others, but I had to be more outgoing to be able to ask for help when I needed it, which was difficult for me because I had always considered myself a bit of shy person, a bit of an introvert, and now I needed to be more vocal with respect to all of my needs. So
Wait,
I
wait,
spent,
go ahead.
yeah, well, I spent the next 9 months and 20 days in various hospitals and rehabilitation centers. And it was really, really difficult getting used to my new physical condition.
Hmm. But at the same time, you could have taken the position that you just hated yourself and you just wanted to make life end and so on. And it doesn't sound like that was the approach that you took.
Mike, I was so fortunate that I had a very supportive family who were with me and helped me every step of the way. In fact, they basically assured me that they would act as my arms and legs to make sure I could still do everything I wanted to do in my life.
Doesn't get much better than that, having a real supportive village, if you will.
Right. I was so fortunate. And, I think that helped me be able to do many things in my life that most people thought would not be possible for
Hmm.
someone in my condition. And I was able to do it because of the help I received from my family.
So, what did you major in at Cornell, let's say before the injury?
Before my injury, I was majoring in industrial engineering.
Okay.
And, after my injury, I went back to school and continued my studies in industrial engineering and actually obtained my degree, my Bachelor of Science in industrial engineering.
Now, what primarily is industrial engineering?
Well, it's kind of a technical aspect of dealing with men, material, machines, and, most likely working at a business where there are a lot of different people working there, where you would try and find out what the best way of people to operate, whether it be in a factory or just in a large business setting when you're dealing with technical aspects of the job. But I never actually worked as an engineer because following my degree, based on the recommendation of one of my psychology professors, I stayed at Cornell and pursued a career in counseling. And I find that a lot more suitable to not only my physical condition, but what I really wanted to do. Because following my injury, I knew that what I really wanted to do was to devote my life and career to helping others.
So you very well could have made the same switch and made the same choices even if you hadn't undergone the accident.
Absolutely. And hopefully I would have because I found it a lot more enjoyable. And I believe it taught me a lot about dealing with people. And it made me feel very good about myself to know that I was still in a position, despite my disability, where I could help others.
Mm-hmm. So you stayed at Cornell and got that master's degree in counseling, which which really gave you that opportunity. What did you do after that?
Well, to increase my counseling credentials, I then went to Columbia University, where I obtained my second degree. This one was also in counseling. That degree was in psychological counseling and rehabilitation. And I decided to look for a job in the rehabilitation counseling field. And now that I had two degrees from Cornell and one from Columbia, three prestigious Ivy League degrees, two master's degrees, I didn't think I'd have much difficulty securing employment. But to my dismay, no one would hire me. This was in the mid 70s,
Mm-hmm.
and everyone seemed to feel I was just too disabled to work.
Mm-hmm. Now, why did you go to Columbia to get your second degree, your master's in rehabilitation?
And incidentally, that was the school I actually was injured against during the football
I know,
game I
that's why I
played.
asked. The enemy, right?
Right. But yeah, but I actually applied there for my doctorate, a doctorate in counseling psychology. And initially, I didn't get into that program, but they invited me to participate in their master's program and said that they would reconsider my application when I finished that degree. Now, I thought that was a special uh, letter that I got from them because of my injury, and I thought they just wanted to see me um, that I could do graduate work.
Mm.
As it turned out, virtually everybody that applied for that program got a similar letter. And when I first met with my advisor there at Columbia, he said, if you didn't get in the first time, you're probably not going to get in even when you graduate. So, since I had nothing else to do at that point, I enrolled in the master's program and I completed my second master's degree. And, at the time, even my advisor was pessimistic about my work prospects.
Why?
Um,
Just because of the
why?
disability?
Because of my disability. And
Mm-hmm.
despite the fact that here they were training people to be rehabilitation counselors and encouraging people to go into that field, they felt that due to my disability, I would still have a very difficult time gaining employment.
Which is as ironic as it gets.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I was just very fortunate that there was a facility on Long Island called Abilities Incorporated, which was part of what was then called the Human Resources Center, is now called the Viscardi Center after its founder, Dr. Henry Viscardi Jr. And they hired me to work as a vocational rehabilitation counselor for other individuals who had severe disabilities.
I'm a little bit familiar with the Biscardi Center and have found them to be very open minded in the way they operate.
They were terrific, absolutely terrific. And I was so fortunate to get involved with them, to be hired to work for them, and, to be associated with all the fine work they were doing on behalf of helping other individuals with disabilities.
Mm-hmm. So was it primarily paraplegics and quadriplegics and so on, or did they do blind people and other disabilities as well?
They did a lot of different disabilities, but they did not work with people that were visually impaired. For that, in New York State, there was a special agency called the Commission for the Visually Handicapped that helped people with visual impairments. But we dealt with all different types of disabilities, whether people were hearing impaired or had not just spinal cord injuries, but other disabilities, either from birth or disabilities that they developed through diseases. And as it turned out, I was probably one of the most severely disabled of the people that I dealt with.
Hmm. Well, but you were also, by any definition, a good role model.
Well, I was fortunate that I was able to help a lot of different people. And I felt that when they looked at me and saw that I was able to work despite my disability, I know it encouraged them to do their best to go out and get a job themselves.
And of course, it really ultimately comes down to attitude. And for you, having a positive attitude had to really help a great deal.
I think it made all the difference in the world. And I was very fortunate that it was my family that instilled that positive attitude in me. And they gave me so much help that after a while I thought I'd be letting them down if I didn't do everything I could do to make something out of my life.
So, what did you do?
Well, not only did I go back to school and complete my education, but I went to work and, got up early every day. And with the aid of a personal care attendant, I was able to go to work and function as a vocational counselor and help others in trying to achieve their goals.
Now, were you going to school while you were doing some of this?
No, I
Okay.
had finished my
You
second
finished school.
master's degree
Okay.
and now was able to work full time.
Okay. So you did that. And how long did you work there?
Well, I worked there for a little over 2 years. And, my duties and responsibilities kept expanding while I was there. And one of my duties was to speak at conferences before groups and organizations concerning affirmative action and non discrimination for people with disabilities. And often after my talks, I would be asked questions. And while I would do my best to respond appropriately, I was always careful to caution the questioners that they should really consult with a lawyer about their concerns. And I guess it didn't take long before I started to think, there's no reason why I couldn't become that lawyer. So after a little over 2 years, I decided to leave the job and I went to Hofstra University School of Law.
So now what year was this?
I left the job. I started the job in 77. I left in 79 when I
Got it.
started law school.
Okay. So you went to Hofstra
All right. And while I
and
was
yeah,
okay,
go ahead.
while I was at Hofstra, through my brother's suggestion, my brother was working as a public defender at the time. He suggested I do an internship at the district attorney's office.
Hmm.
So after my second year of law school, I did an internship there during the summer, and I found a new way that I could help people and serve the community as a whole. And I really enjoyed that work. So when I was in my third year of law school, I applied for a full-time position with the district attorney's office. And I was very fortunate that the district attorney was a very progressive, self-confident individual who based his hiring decision on my abilities rather than my disability.
Wow. That had to be, especially back then, a fairly, as you said, progressive, but an amazing thing to do because even today, there are so many times that we get challenges and too many things thrown in our way. But you had someone who really thought enough of you and obviously decided that your abilities were such on the job that you could do it.
I was very fortunate to have come in contact with the district attorney at the time. His name was Dennis Dillon. And he seemed to know that when I'd go to court, a jury was not going to base its verdict on my inability to walk, but rather on my skill and competence as an attorney. And thanks to the training and guidance I received in the office, I became a very confident and competent, skilled trial attorney.
Well, and it had to be the way you projected yourself that would convince a jury to decide cases in the right way. So, again, kudos to you.
Thank you. Well, I certainly did my best to do that. And at the time that I applied for this job, I didn't know of any quadriplegics that were trial attorneys.
Mm-hmm.
There may have been some, but I didn't know of any. Certainly, there were none on Long Island, and certainly no assistant district attorneys at the time that I knew of who were quadriplegics.
Now, of course, the question that comes to mind is, so was the office accessible?
No, that was a
Okay.
great question. And, let me just go further by telling you that my first day in court, I couldn't even fit through the swinging doorways in the courtroom. They were too narrow to let me get through to get to the prosecutor's table because my electric wheelchair was too
It's too
wide.
wide. Mm-hmm. What did you do or what happened?
Well, eventually they had to take off the swinging doorways and the screws and bolts that kept them in place. But usually I had to go very roundabout on a long way to get to the back of each courtroom and go through the back, which was really difficult. And one of my assignments happened to be to our traffic court bureau, which was in a neighboring building on the second floor. And unfortunately, there, the elevator was broken. So after 3 days, I was actually received my first promotion because they didn't know when it would be fixed. But
Wow.
eventually, I was able to get into court, and I did a lot of litigation while I was there.
How did judges react to all of this?
It was very new to them as well. And, there are times when you needed to approach the bench and talk very
Yeah,
quietly, so the jury wouldn't hear you. And it was very difficult because
the
I had
benches are elevated.
yeah, and I had difficulty approaching the bench or even turning my head side enough to look up at the judges and then for them to hear me. And sometimes they would have to get off the bench and, meet me on the side of the courtroom to have conferences. But for the most part, I thought they were very supportive. I thought they appreciated the hard work that I was doing. And I think they tried to be accommodating when they could.
Did you ever encounter any that just were totally intolerant of all of it?
Sure.
Mm-hmm.
Many of them were very impatient. Some of them had difficulty hearing. And when I was trying to look up and talk to them without the jury hearing, some of them had trouble hearing me because, they were much higher up than I was in my wheelchair. So it was very challenging.
I was involved in a lawsuit against an airline because they wouldn't allow me and my guide dog to sit where we wanted to sit on the airplane, which was in direct violation of even the rules of the airline. And when it went to court, the judge who was assigned it was a federal judge, and he was like 80, and he just couldn't hear anything at all. It was really too bad. And of course my wife was with me, and of course in her chair, so she wasn't sitting in a regular row. And he even grilled her, "What are you doing? Why aren't you sitting in a row?" And she said, "I'm in a wheelchair." Oh, yeah. It's amazing that hopefully we have progressed a little bit from a lot of that. The
I would
lawsuit
like to
was
think so.
yeah, the lawsuit was 1985, so it was a long time ago, and hopefully we have progressed some. But still, there are way too many people who don't get it and who don't understand nearly as much as they should, and don't internalize that maybe we're not all the same and we can't necessarily do everything exactly the same every single time.
Right. And, I had the added misfortune of having my injury 20 years before the Americans with Disabilities Act was
Right.
passed. And that made an enormous difference for not just people in wheelchairs, but people with all different types of disabilities.
So, how did you in general learn to deal with people's perceptions of you rather than the reality?
Well, that
Because
took a
clearly,
while.
yeah, there are lots of perceptions.
Right. Many people think that because you have a physical disability, that you must also have an intellectual disability.
Hmm.
And people would often come into my room and wherever I was, whether it was when I was first in the hospital or later at the office, and speak to the person next to me and ask them questions about me as if I couldn't speak for myself,
Yeah.
or even as if I wasn't even there. And it took a while for me to be more outgoing and convince people that yes, they can deal with me. I can still talk and think. And I think whenever a jury came into the courtroom for the first time, I think they were very surprised to see the prosecutor as somebody with a disability who was sitting in an electric wheelchair.
Hmm. I know once we went to a restaurant, and of course, having a family with two people and two different disabilities, went to this restaurant and we were waiting to be seated. And finally, Karen said, "The hostess is just staring at us. She doesn't know who to talk to," because I'm not making eye contact necessarily. And Karen sitting in her chair is way lower. And so Karen just said to me, "Well, this lady doesn't know who to talk to." So I said, "Well, maybe we can get her to just ask us what we want and what help we need." And
Right.
our carrying on the conversation got this nice lady to recognize, oh, I can talk with them. And so she said, "Well, how can I help you?" And we both kind of said, "We'd like to sit and have breakfast." "Oh, okay." And it went well from there. But it is a challenge, and people have crazy perceptions. I know going down the stairs at the World Trade Center on September 11th, when I encountered the firefighters coming up, for a while they blocked me from going because they decided that I needed help, and they would ask me questions like, "We're going to help you. Is that okay?" And I said, "No, it's not." But they always talked loud because if you're blind, you obviously can't hear either.
Right.
And it was difficult to get them to deal with all of that. And finally, I had to just say, "Look, I got my friend David over here who can see. We're working together. We're fine." And they let us go because I had a sighted person with me, not that I had the ability to go downstairs, even though I had to help keep David focused sometimes. And also, there's no magic for a blind person to go downstairs. You go down the stairs, you hold the rail, you turn left in this case, and you go down the next batch of stairs. But people don't recognize that maybe there are techniques that we use to deal with the same things that they deal with, only in a different way.
Absolutely. And that applies to work as well. I mean, people assume that if you can't do a job the way most people seem to do it, who don't have a disability, they automatically assume you're not going to be able to function at all at the job.
Yeah.
And a lot of times it takes a lot of convincing to show people that there are other ways of approaching a problem and handling a work situation.
One of the common things that we as blind people face, and it happens in schools and so on, is, "Oh, you don't need to learn Braille. That's outmoded. You can listen to books that are computer generated or recorded and so on." And the reality is, no. We need to learn Braille for the same reason that sighted people learn to read print, and that is it's all about learning to spell, it's learning about sentence structure and so on, and it's learning about having better ways to be able to truly interact with the text. As I tell people, I don't care what anyone says, you will not learn physics as well from recordings as you can by truly having access to everything in a Braille book, because you can refer back easier. And they've done some improvements in recording, but it's still not the same as what you get when you do Braille, which is the same thing for you reading print, or any other sighted person reading print. You read that print because there are various reasons why you need to do that, as opposed to learning how to just listen to books recorded anyway.
Right. Well, I had the added misfortune of being injured well before they had laptop computers.
Yeah, me too. Well,
And
not I wasn't injured, but yeah.
right, so trying to do my schoolwork or later work at a job, uh, it posed even more challenges. But now, of course, having ebooks and being able to use a computer has made a big difference, not just for me, but for many individuals with
Sure.
disabilities.
Do you use like programs like Dragon Naturally Speaking to interact with the computer?
I tried that and I had a lot of difficulty with it. I know you need to train it. And when I first tried it, which was in its infancy,
Mhm.
it just wasn't responding well to my voice. So I don't use that. I've been fortunate with that with advancements in wheelchairs. My wheelchair now has a Bluetooth device connected to my joystick. And I could actually move my left arm a little bit where I could work the joystick and move the mouse on my computer,
Oh,
moving my
okay.
joystick.
You really might want to look into Dragon again. It is just so incredibly different than it was years ago. I remember when Dragon Dictate first came out and all of the challenges of it, but they have done so much work in developing the language models that it's a whole lot better than it used to be. And yeah, you have to train it, but training isn't all that hard nowadays, even by comparison to what it was. And it gives you a lot of flexibility. And I am absolutely certain it would recognize your voice without any difficulty.
Well, it's good to hear that they've made those advancements. I
And it's
know.
not nearly as expensive as it used to be either.
Well, that's good to hear. I know when I first tried it, it was incredibly frustrating
Yeah.
because it wasn't responding well to my voice.
And it was like $1,500, as I recall. It was pretty expensive.
Right?
Now it's maybe $200 or $300, and there's also a legal version of it and other things like that. Yeah, you really ought to try it. You might find it makes a big difference. It's worth exploring anyway.
Okay.
But be that as it may, so you dealt with people's perceptions, and how did you, as you continued to encounter how people behave towards you, how did you keep from allowing that to embitter you or driving you crazy?
Well, certainly at work, I needed to go in a jacket and tie. And I found that when you're wearing a jacket and tie, many people treated you differently than when you're just wearing street clothes. So I think that certainly helped at work. But I later became a supervisor in the district attorney's office. And people saw that, not only could they talk with me on an intellectual level, but they saw I was supervising other assistant district attorneys. And I think that convinced a lot of people pretty quickly that I knew what I was doing and that they should treat me no different than they would any other
Yeah.
lawyer, assistant district attorney.
Yeah. Well, and it is projecting that confidence in a positive way that does make such a big difference.
Absolutely. And I think when people saw me at work, uh, one of the things that I appreciated was I never even needed to mention again that somebody with a disability could work and not just at an entry level position,
Right.
at a very responsible position. I was convincing them just by showing them
Yeah.
without ever having to mention that somebody with a disability could do this kind of work.
I never bring it up unless it comes up and a lot of times, especially when talking on the phone and so on, it never comes up. I've had times when people eventually met me and of course were themselves somewhat amazed, oh, a blind person and all that. And I said, nothing's changed here, folks. The reality is that I'm the same guy I was when you were just talking to me on the phone. So let's move forward. And mostly people got it and and dealt with it very well.
Well, I used to have a lot of people when they meet me for the first time were very surprised to see that I was in a wheelchair.
Yeah.
Another one would say, "Boy, you didn't sound like you were disabled
Oh,
when you were on the
yeah.
phone."
Yeah.
Right? And I think they were very surprised when they met me.
I've had some people who've said that to me. Well, you didn't sound blind on the telephone. And so, depending on how snarky I feel or not, I might say, well, what does a blind person sound like? And that generally tends to stop them because the reality is, what does a blind person sound like? It doesn't mean anything at all. And it's really their attitudes that need to change. And I know as a keynote speaker for the last 23 years, just by doing the things that I do and talking and communicating with people, it is also all about helping to change attitudes, which is a lot of fun.
Michael, when I first went back to college, uh, I was approached by a student on campus. And when he asked if I was Ken Kunken and I responded that I was, he asked, "Aren't you supposed to be in the hospital?" Now, I was very tempted to say yes, but I escaped. Please don't tell anyone. But, it even took a while to just show people somebody with a disability does not need to be permanently in a rehab facility or a hospital or staying at home with their families. That there's an awful lot somebody could do and to be seen out in public and show people that you can work, you can go to school, you can do basically what everybody else does once you're given the opportunity.
Of course, being spiteful, my response would have been, well, yeah, I should still be in the hospital doing brain surgery, but I decided that I didn't want to be a doctor because I didn't have any patients. So I decided to take a different career.
Right.
Yeah. Oh, people. Yeah. What do you do? And we all face it. But the reality is, and I believe very firmly and have thought this way for a long time, that like it or not, we're teachers and we do need to teach people and we need to take that role on. And it can be difficult sometimes because you can lose patience depending on what kind of questions people ask and so on. But the reality is we're teachers and our job is to teach, and we can make that a very fun thing to do as we move forward too.
Michael, I found most people really want to be helpful.
Yeah.
A lot of times they don't know how to be helpful or
Right.
how to go about it or what to say or what to do. But most people are really good people that want to help. And, the more they come in contact with somebody with a disability, the more comfortable they will feel.
Right. And they'll learn to ask if you want help and they won't make the assumption, which is, of course, the whole point.
Michael, when you leave the job at the district attorney's office, you would go through what they call an exit interview, where they would ask you what you thought was the best part of the job, what you thought could be improved. And I'm so happy and proud to say that I was told that a number of assistant district attorneys said that one of the best parts of their job was meeting and getting to know and working with me.
Mm.
And the reason why I wanted to highlight that was I know they weren't talking about me being Ken Kunken, but me being somebody with a disability, because unless they had a close relative with a disability, people rarely came in daily contact with somebody with a disability. And for them, it was often a revelation that they found helped motivate and inspire them to work harder in their job. And they were very appreciative of that.
But they also learned that the disability wasn't what defined you. What defined you was you and your personality and what you did, not necessarily exactly how you did it.
Absolutely. And I think it was also a revelation that working with me did not involve additional work for them.
Right.
I was able to carry my own weight and often was more productive than many of the people I was working with.
Right. Well, and I think that's a very crucial point about the whole thing. When you became a lawyer, did that change your view of yourself? I mean, I know it was a kind of an evolution that got you to being a lawyer, but how did becoming a lawyer and going through and getting the law degree and then working in a law office, how did that change your perceptions and your attitudes and outlook?
It really changed it a great deal because I had people look at me with a very different eye when they were looking at me. I enjoyed my work as a vocational rehabilitation counselor very much, and I encourage people to do that work. But I felt that there were people that looked at me and thought, he has a disability. Maybe he could only work with other people who had disabilities. And I was very proud of the fact that when I became a lawyer, I was working with very few people that had disabilities. Most of them were able-bodied, and I wanted to show people that you're not limited in any way with who you're going to work with and what you could do. And I think it's so important for people to keep their perceptions high, their expectations high when they're dealing with individuals. because just because somebody has a disability does not mean they cannot perform and do as much as virtually anybody else on the job.
Hmm. Well, and you clearly continued to have high expectations of and for you, but also I would suspect that the result was you had high expectations for those around you as well. You helped them shape what they did, and by virtue of the way you functioned, you helped them become better people as well.
Well, I certainly tried to. And from the feedback that I've gotten from many of the people I worked with, that seemed to be the case. And I'm very proud of that. In
Yeah.
fact, I might add, Michael, that 2 years ago, the district attorney now, her name is Ann Donnelly, actually started an award in the district attorney's office that's given out annually that they named the Kenneth J. Kunken Award.
Mm.
They named it for me because they wanted to recognize and honor the outstanding assistant district attorney each year who displayed the work ethic and the loyalty and devotion to the office, as well the person in the wheelchair, right? And I'm very proud of that.
But I will bet, and I'm not trying to mitigate it, but I will bet that mostly that award came about because of the things that you did and your work ethic, and that the wheelchair aspect of it was really somewhat second nature and far down the list.
I'm very proud of the fact that that seems to be the case. And one of the aspects of that award was they talked about the effect that I had on my colleagues and the beneficial effect that that was.
Yeah, because the reality is it ultimately comes down to who you are and what you do. And I'm not, and again, I'm not mitigating being in a wheelchair or having any kind of disability, but I really truly believe ultimately the disability is not what defines us. It's how we are and what we do and how we behave in society that really will be what helps us make a mark on whatever we're involved with.
Right. And I think for some, as I say, it was a revelation to see that somebody with a disability had the same needs, wants, and desires as everybody else. We were certainly no different with respect to that.
Right. So, how long did you work as a lawyer in the district attorney's office?
Well, I worked there full time for more than 33 years. And then I worked there in a part time capacity for an additional 8 years. So, all told, more than 40 years I worked there. And in fact, I'm one of the longest serving Nassau County assistant
Hmm.
district attorneys that they've ever had.
Now, why did you go back to part time after 33 years?
Well, there were a number of reasons. I thought that due to some health issues, I wanted to play it safe and make sure that I locked in my pension because I
Ah,
thought there would be a bigger payout if I retired while I was still working than if I died while I was working on the job. As it turned out, my health issue seemed to resolve itself, but I decided that, retiring when I did gave me some more time to spend at home with my family, and
there
I
you
really
go.
appreciated being able to do that.
That's a very admirable thing. Can't complain about that. So, what keeps you going?
What keeps me going now is my family. Just so your listeners know, I'm married to the wonderful woman that's actually sitting to my right now. Her name is Anna, and we're actually the parents of triplet sons. We have three incredible boys, Joseph, James, and Timothy. They're now 20 years old, and they're currently sophomores at three separate colleges in upstate New York. And they're the light of my life. I couldn't be more proud. And they're what keeps me going these days.
What colleges?
Well, James is going to the State University of New York at Morrisville, where
Okay.
he's studying renewable energy.
Ooh.
Timothy is pursuing a dual major at the SI Newhouse School of Communications and the Maxwell School of Public Policy at Syracuse University. And my son Joseph is actually attending my alma mater, Cornell University, where he's majoring in mechanical engineering.
And do they all go watch football games on the weekend? I mean, given the fact that at least a couple of those are at schools with good football teams.
Right, but you know what? They've never wanted anything to do with football. But they are all physically active, in great shape, and in fact, all of them have pursued the martial arts, and all three of them are second-degree black belts in Taekwondo, and they've all even worked as instructors in the Taekwondo studio here in Long Island.
So dad has to be careful or they'll take you out, huh?
You bet. In fact, I've got my own three personal bodyguards when I go
That's
out.
right. You can't do better than that. And Anna, which I'll bet is more formidable than all of them.
Anna's incredible. I mean, she is just a force that is unstoppable. She's incredible.
Well, that's cool all the way around, and it's great that you have a good neighborhood around you to support you, and I think we all need that. That's pretty important to deal with. So, with your job and all that, now that you are retired, I don't know whether you have much stress in your life, but how do you deal with stress? And how
Um,
does stress affect you, and or does it make any difference with a disability?
It sure does. It's an interesting question because before my injury, one of the ways I would deal with stress would be out on the football field.
Yeah.
You know, being physically active, running into an individual, to tackle or block. That was a great way to relieve some of my stress. Once I had my injury, I no longer had that outlet. So I had to find different ways of dealing with it. One of my ways was, trying to sit outside and sit in the garden or by water and, just enjoy nature and try and relax and clear my mind. But now my best stress relievers are my three children.
Hmm.
I mean, spending time with them, watching all that they're doing, I find that the best way of me to be able to relax and relieve any anxieties that I have.
Well, I think there's a lot of value in doing um, things that keep you calm and focused. I think that is the best way to deal with stress. All too often, we don't think or be introspective about ourselves and our lives, and we don't really step back and get rid of that stress mentally. And that's where it really all comes from. I mean, I know people have physical manifestations of stress and so on, but I would submit that typically stress is so much more an emotional thing because we haven't learned how to deal with it. And you clearly have.
It took a while, but
Yeah.
yeah, now I have my family to help every step of the way, and that includes relieving the stress that I'm under.
Yeah. And stress is important to get rid of and not have around. It will help you live a whole lot longer not to have stress. I just went through a week ago an operation to change a heart valve. And people keep asking me, well, weren't you worried? Weren't you stressed over that? And my answer was no. I had no control over it really happening, to my knowledge. I don't think that I've been a very poor eater, and all of my arteries and everything were good. And so, no, I wasn't stressed. Even when I first learned that there was an issue and was in an emergency room for over 24 hours, mostly sitting around, I chose not to be stressed, and it was a choice. And so I just listened to things around me and became quite entertained at some of the people who were in the emergency room with me. But being stressed wasn't going to do anything to help the process at all. So I refused to get stressed.
That's great. And, I think this finally retiring has helped me deal with stress as well because working as an assistant district attorney, there can be a lot of stressful situations in the office.
Yeah.
And it's nice to finally be retired and be able to enjoy all of my activities outside of the office.
What would you say is probably the most stressful thing that you had to endure as an attorney? You did this for 40 years or almost 40 years. So well, actually, yeah, for 40 years. So what would you
Right?
say is the most stressful thing that you ever had to deal with?
Well, I had to rely on my memory because it was difficult for me even turning pages of a book or pulling, pieces of paper out of a file. and there was a lot of paperwork that you
Hmm.
needed to be familiar with, whether they be grand jury testimony or prior witness statements. And I had to rely a lot of my memory and through the help of student interns or paralegals or secretaries. And it was very difficult. And I might add, just to give you one anecdote, one day after I had convicted a defendant of, you know, felony, he was a person with a lot of prior involvement with the criminal justice system. And I was about to go down for his sentencing. Uh, he jumped in the elevator with me. And now we're alone in the elevator riding down. And here I am with this person that I convicted of a serious case. And I'm about to recommend that he go to an upstate prison. And he approaches me and says, I have a proposition for you. If you don't send me to jail, I'll agree to work as your personal care attendant for a year, which really struck me as odd. I mean, he must have thought that working for me for a year would be the equivalent of going to prison for a few years. But fortunately, the elevator door opened and I politely turned down his request and went to court, and he was sentenced to 2 to 4 years in an upstate prison.
Still, it was creative.
Right.
So, in all of your life and all the things you've done, what are you most proud of?
Well, I'm but definitely most proud of my family life. I mean, as I indicated, I'm married now, married for more than 21 years now. My three boys are sophomores in college and doing absolutely great and make me proud every single day. But I'm proud of the fact that I was able to go back to school, complete my education, and work at a job and earn a living where I was able to support myself and able to purchase a house and live now with my wife and children and lead as just about as normal a life as any other family would lead.
Now, being married to Anna, is that your first marriage?
It sure is, and I'm
So
sticking
there you
with
go.
it.
Well, I
Right.
I, I hear you, and but you guys met late, and I'm going to step out on a limb and say it proves something that I've always felt, which is you'll get married when the right person comes along, especially if you're mature enough to recognize it.
You're right, and I was very fortunate that the right person came along in my life,
There you
uh,
are.
and we have a very happy marriage that I cannot picture life without it right now.
My wife and I got married when I was 32, she was 33, but we knew what we wanted in a partner. And when we first met each other, it just sort of clicked right from the beginning. We met in January of 1982, and in July, I asked her to marry me, and we got married in November of 1982. And so we were married for 40 years before she passed. And
Mm.
there are always challenges, but you deal with it. So it must have been really an interesting time and an interesting life suddenly discovering you have three boy triplets.
It really was. When Anna and I decided to get married, she told me that she wanted to have my baby, and not just any baby, my baby. She said she wanted to see a little Kunken running around our home, and this really seemed impossible. At the time, I had been paralyzed for more than 30 years,
Hmm.
and I was already in my 50s. But we looked into various options, including in vitro fertilization, and we're very excited to learn I could still father a child. So we pursued it, and through good fortune, good luck, and I guess somebody smiling on us from above, Anna became pregnant with triplets, and I couldn't be happier to have these three wonderful boys in my life.
So did becoming a father change you, or how did you evolve when that all happened?
It sure did. I mean, it went from me being number one in Anna's life to suddenly uh, being number four after all three boys got the attention they needed. But it was wonderful for me to be able to help shape their lives and guide them so that they would develop the right character and values and learn the importance of helping others throughout their lives, which they do. And I think it's made me a better person being able to help and guide them.
That's cool. Well, the other thing I would ask is if you had a chance to go back and talk to a younger Ken, what would you say? What would you teach them so that they would maybe make mistakes that you made?
Well, I'd say there's an awful lot you could still do in life, even without your physical movement. And sometimes it takes a lot of patience and a lot of self reflection, but to realize there's an awful lot you can do and that they need to keep their expectations high for themselves as well as for others. And to realize that just because something has not been done before doesn't mean they cannot do it now.
Yeah.
They've got to find different ways of approaching problems and handling it and developing some self confidence in themselves and their ability to deal with difficult situations.
How did the Americans with Disabilities Act improve all that you did and make your life, especially on the job, better?
Well, it made facilities so much more accessible. When I first went back to college, there was not one ramp or curb cut on the entire campus. On my first day back at school, I had to be either pulled up or bounced down close to 100 steps
Yeah.
just to attend my classes. And as I indicated in the DA's office, I couldn't even fit through the swinging doorways to get in the courtroom. So it made it tremendously easier to not have to deal with all the physical challenges.
Yeah.
But it also made it better for dealing with other people and their attitudes about dealing with people with disabilities. Because thanks to the Americans with Disabilities Act, you see more people with disabilities out in public. So people are more used to seeing, dealing, interacting with people and seeing what they can do and that they're just like everybody else. And as a result, people's attitudes have been changing. And I think that's helped me as well in many different ways.
Cool. Well, you have written a book about all of this. Tell me about the book.
Okay, I actually started writing a book when I was still in the rehab facility, not long after I was hurt. A friend of my Aunt Lorraine's by the name of Albert Meglin visited me in the hospital and thought that one, it may help me deal with my depression by talking about what I was going through, but also inform other individuals what a spinal cord injury was like and what's involved with rehabilitation. So he used to visit me in the rehab facility one day a week for a number of weeks for me to start writing a book about my experiences. And then when I went back to school, I started working on it on my own. But I would pick it up and stop and start and stop again over the course of 50 years. And then once I retired, I had more time to sit down with my wife and I would dictate to her and she would type it on her laptop computer until we finally finished my memoir, which is called I Dream of Things That Never Were, the Ken Kunken Story. And it's published by a company called 12 Tables Press. And they could learn more about my book by going on my website, which is kenkunken.com. And I might add that where I got the title of my book was 6 months after my injury, I was asked to testify before a United States Health Subcommittee chaired by Senator Edward Kennedy. Mm-hmm. And 8 days after my testimony, Senator Kennedy sent me a glass paperweight in the mail that had an inscription on it that the senator said his late brother Robert Kennedy liked very much. And the inscription read, "Some men see things as they are and say why. I dream of things that never were and say why not." Yeah. And that's where I got the title of my book, I Dream of Things That Never Were.
Yeah, that's cool. And where can people get the book?
Well, it's available on Amazon. It's also available at the Cornell bookstore. And if they go on my website, kenkunken.com.
Spell Kunken for me, please.
It's Kun, as in Nancy, Ken. That tells of a number of ways that they could purchase the book, both the hardcover book. It's also available as a Kindle version, as an ebook. And just recently, we put it out as an audiobook as well.
Oh, good.
And they could learn all about it by going to the website. But certainly it's available on Amazon. If they wanted to order in bulk, they could contact my publisher directly, and he could help them fulfill that type of order.
Cool. That is great. So now the real question is, are there any more books in Ken to come out?
Well, this book took me 50 years to
Yeah, I
write.
know you got to go a little bit faster.
So, no, I think I wrote down everything that I wanted to convey to people in that book. And now I'm actively just promoting the book. Like you, I've spoken at a number of different events as a motivational speaker. And, the book has given me a way to get my story out to more people by reading the book.
Well, maybe it's Anna's turn to write a book. Who knows?
Right.
She
I
might be
agree.
writing a book in secret and you'll find out
Yeah.
about it when it's published.
Well, hopefully it doesn't reveal too many intimate details.
Or none that are too embarrassing.
Hmm.
Well, I want to thank you both for being here and talking with me for the last hour plus. We've been having a lot of fun doing this, and I appreciate you taking the time to do it. It's been a while in coming, but I'm glad that we have made it happen. And I hope all of you listening out there have enjoyed this and that you've learned a lot. And especially about the whole concept of unstoppable mindset, because the reality is that we have no control necessarily of the things that happen to us, but we absolutely, as Ken has proven tonight, time and time again, we absolutely have control over how we deal with what happens to us. So I hope that this has been something that you found interesting. Love to hear your thoughts. I would appreciate it if you'd email me at michaelhi@accessibe.com. That's michaelhi @accessibe, ACCESSIBE.com. Or go to our podcast page, michaelhingson.com/podcast. And that's michaelhingson.com/podcast. You can listen to all of our podcast episodes there, but you also can find us anywhere you find podcasts, which probably most of you have. But I'd love to get your thoughts, and I hope that you'll give us a 5-star rating on our podcast today. This has been a great one, and we really value your ratings, especially we hope that you'll give us really positive ratings. If you know of anyone who wants to be a guest or you think ought to be a guest, can you as well? Please let me know, introduce us. We're always looking for more guests for the podcast. But I just want to, again, Ken, thank you for being here and really express my gratitude for the stories and all the things that I think you've taught us all today. So thank you very much for being here.
Michael, thank you for having me as a guest and giving me the opportunity to share my story with your listeners.